Hello and welcome to All Hands on Tech. On today's episode, Pluralsight's Josh Ruggles speaks with Scott Lewis, who's the VP of Engineering at APiO. They talk about the importance of taking care of technology teams, how to optimize team structure, and the process of identifying new business opportunities brought by disruption.
First thing I want to ask when it relates to your business model is how some of COVID has upended that in the short term and sort of what it's doing in the long term as well.
COVID in the past, we were in a pretty good economy, and APiO in factoring, it wasn't really too lucrative or too attractive, I guess, a better way to say it, because a lot of people were, had a lot of business and they were getting paid and lots of things were really great. But when COVID started happening, the supply chain tightened. And all of a sudden, all of the happy days of I build something, I bill you, you pay me in 30 days or 15 days kind of went away. And it takes a long time to get a loan. And so what ended up happening is businesses started struggling for money. Gratefully, the PPP came along, but now that that's drying up, APiO has gotten very busy in the sense that now that they, money is tight, and people are starting to, struggle to get money. And the other factor that's going on is there's these monetary names that the Treasury call and the Fed call this, so M1 and M2, and they have to do with how much money people are keeping in the bank and how much banks have on their balance sheets. And the money is growing in banks, and they don't really have a way to deploy it, mainly because of the risk positions that people get put into. And so coming, this year and next, money is piling up in the banks, and banks are needing to get rid of that money in forms of, loans, because they have to, all that is a drain on their balance sheet because they have to pay interest on that money. And so they're looking at, trying to find ways to make that, move. But since the risk position's really difficult to ascertain, and people don't really know where things are going in the economy, we are able to go into accounting systems and to bank accounts and to do third-party analysis of that and bring out some of the risk positions that may have heretofore been difficult to figure out. And so we're bringing in a brand new way for banks to look at the way that they can understand risk, understand markets, understand how they can go ahead and deploy that money. Not only that, but we're making it so it's a lot faster. And so since we can get the information directly out of the accounting system rather than having to email around balance sheets and income statements and client lists and invoice lists and all that kind of thing, APAR, aging, and those kind of things, we can pull that directly out of the accounting system. We can also look for fraud. We can also look for, incompetence, if you will, in the way that people run businesses, and help banks not only be able to loan to people more cheaply, but also understand, the businesses that they can still lend to in this day and age.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really had to ramp up a lot of what you're doing. And so how has this changed the team dynamic, and what moving forward, like looking at 2021 with all these shifts, how has that changed what you on the back end are doing and how your team is responding in terms of process and things like that?
Obviously we had an office, a brick and mortar office. We were in Kiln. If anybody's familiar with Kiln, it's a co-working facility, co-working company here in Salt Lake. We were in there. We actually left there just before COVID and had rented leased a really nice office space that we're still paying for. And on the very beginning of the lease, I think we were in it 2 months, and then COVID hit, and we haven't really been back. So obviously, all those things have changed how we've had to do things. We've had to adapt to online meetings, and all of our stand-ups have had to move that direction. We kind of had a pretty good way of doing it. We learned with a group that we worked with in Costa Rica how to, build teams, even though people are remote, in such a way that, we felt like we were friends already. We kind of celebrated things together. In fact, when we accomplished some things, we went to do a celebration as we normally do. Like this time, particularly, we went go-karting, and this was pre-COVID. And all of my teammates were like, what are we going to do for the remote guys? We need to make sure that they, unbeknownst to them, I should have let them know, but we were already, sending them some additional monies and some different things so that they could do a similar type celebration, in Costa Rica rather than, fly them up. We couldn't do that at the time. So, I think that's one of the main things that we learned is that we really need to build a team, and you can do that remotely as well as, on in person. And so much so that your team actually feels like they're part of it and are worried when you go to a celebration or you have some nice thing happen. They want to make sure that the remote teammates get the same things.
How has this shifted what your clients have needed, and how have you responded? You kind of answered this earlier on, but I wonder if we can dive a little bit deeper on just kind of the expectations.
Yeah, it tended to accelerate what we'd been attempting to do. So in the past, we mostly dealt with smaller, maybe upstarts. We had construction companies who have not been have not had great access to capital, especially for subcontractors. Obviously the bigs of the bigs, they can go get financing. In fact, many of them had hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and just sitting on this cash because, construction was pretty robust. But even, in the defense sector and in, we have some breweries, believe it or not, here, even in Salt Lake. We've got, like I say, defense contractors. And what ends up happening when times are good is invoice flow and, the deal flow works really, really well. And you get paid fairly quickly. And, there's some bad actors out there that pay really slowly regardless of the economy. But what ends up happening when a bad economy starts happening is people, even good intentioned people will start holding on to cash, holding off suppliers saying, I used to pay you in, 22 days or paid when I got the invoice, but now I'm, holding off because I'm making sure I can hit my payroll, and I'm making sure that I can pay my rent, and I'm making sure I can pay my suppliers that are absolutely critical. Maybe they're larger than me and they won't hold, I can't buy any more equipment or material so that I can build the next widget or produce whatever. And so they start holding on to, and so it's just it's like the freeway, when you're trying to commute home and somebody does a quick move and the guy behind them stops, and it just gets more exacerbated till somebody gets rear-ended at the back end of this long chain. Same thing in finance. Somebody makes adjusts something to where they paid in 15 days and now they're paying in 30 days. So that's maybe what appears to be a slowdown, right? But the next guy has a different, perspective on that and maybe slows it down a little more. And pretty soon it gets down to the very end of the chain and somebody has to not make payroll or has to not be able to fulfill an order because they can't buy material. And so essentially it was just like a traffic jam happened in finance. And so people started bumping up against various things. And the way you can look at finance is, maybe it's a better braking system, right? So I may be able to go grab an infusion of cash. Typically it could be a loan or it could be, additional funding from investors, or it could be to your buyers. You might be able to go negotiate, hey, I just need the cash now. But it really becomes a situation where the economy, as it starts slowing, it causes a big crash down at some end. And so it really is helpful for businesses to not only know how to go about getting financing. Many of them are still bankable, and a lot of them have started to go and ask for loans, but those are really long. They take a long time. So if you're facing a short-term cash crunch where you don't have money to pay your employees right now, you need to find a way to go about doing that. And there are a lot of alternatives, and a lot of people don't know about those. Traditionally, it's been factoring, and it's an expensive kind of money, but you eventually get to where you can get the cheaper monies at loans and investments and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of what's happened to us, is we have been kind of trying to help out during this crash, if you will, this just financial traffic jam. We're able to invest, money, or not invest, but give people money so that they can meet their short-term obligations and not get into a wreck, at the end of it. So it's basically, we help stopgap that whole. And I think that's really what's happened during this time, is it's really been important to understand finance, because you might have been fine before and you had a really great business plan and everything was going along fine. We've even found people, who are, using or supplying defense industry, like NASA and, some of the bigs of the bigs, the U.S. Army and the Department of Defense. And they've even had a little bit of an issue, not because I think they've been getting paid a little bit less quickly from the government, but from other people that they kind of get into a little bit of a crunch there. So surprising, you can be a very good business and still get into the traffic jam.
And that's one thing that's been very interesting about this, is it seems like most of the world is trying to catch up with probably more businesses that are like-minded with your company, where it's a digital first approach and, it's not the old way of doing things anymore. And how has that played out with your team? I mean, it sounds like rather than you guys being in sort of financial jeopardy, it was almost the other end, where you guys are suddenly ramping up as quickly as possible. How did you accomplish this influx? And then how are you looking at 2021 to address that?
We were already pretty small, and so we didn't have to move very far in that regard. We like to get bigger. So, one of the big problems for us is, we were looking for a new round of funding, right? And the VC kind of got a little bit scared. There were some big deals that happened, especially here in Utah and Silicon Valley and all around the country, actually around the world. There were still good deals happening. But for in certain cases in unproved businesses, or just depending on the stage you're in, kind of caused a little bit of trouble for us in that regard. But despite that, our demand for our product, demand for the need of what we were doing, it was good for the business, put it that way. And I think you're asking more like things like on internal. Maybe that's an area, but I think one area that, when you start talking about digitization, if you were to look at how, and many people have never applied for a business loan, right? It's pretty easy as a consumer, right? You can just go to the Apple store and you can just get, you put in your social security number, and 15 minutes later, you're walking out with a $1,100 iPhone. And it's not like that for businesses, and because there's no such thing as a credit score. And the credit scores for businesses are not very, they're all pretty analog. You basically, they have these things called the 5 C's of credit. I won't bore you with all of those, but one of those is character. And so it's meeting, the person face to face and understanding, I like this person, or I don't like this person, and I may not loan to them. And so I think as far as digitization goes in the whole world, in banking, it's a very analog process for businesses. I guess it has mechanized a little bit, because it used to be that you would print out or bring your books. In the olden days, you'd bring your books, because that's where they were. They were in a series of actual paper books. And you'd go take them to the bank, and they would review each line and then do some things. They'd transfer them into their own books and do that. Now what they do is they ask you to print them out or put them into PDF and email them back and forth. And they still do. They're not much farther along from where they were even back in those days. They basically get a PDF of your balance sheet and they'll transfer that into their Excel spreadsheet. And then they'll look at your income statement and they'll transfer a few more lines. And then they have built into Excel macros and into formulas how they, calculate some ratios, standard financial ratios and custom ratios. And that's really the state of the art. It's a lot of gut feel and a lot of, unmechanized processes. And I think that what's happening now is that's an expensive process. It costs a lot of money, even from a business perspective and from the bank or a financial institution's perspective. It takes, many thousands of dollars to determine if I'm going to give you a $250,000 loan or a $500,000 loan. And so that's what I think is going to happen in 2021 and beyond, is that all of this is going to become more mechanized. And there's going to be a lot more, less of the character type information that they have to glean personally at lunches and breakfasts and that sort of thing, and actually come to more hard facts and some more, mechanization of that. There are quite a few companies who are working on this exact sort of thing, from loan origination systems, loan origination software companies, to companies like us that connect and analyze data for the pre-work that lenders may have to do. And so it also has something to do with millennial or modern thinking people, younger people. They are used to, getting things in a different way, they're, when you go to a website and it says, hey, come on in and talk to a banker to get a loan, they're just like, what is this? Who are you? I'm not going to do that.
With a company like yours, is it kind of more of a let's get back to the basics? Because I'm sure you had or have lofty goals of what you want to develop with your team. But when you're hitting such a ramp of, new clients and things like that, is it just a back to the basics, sort of like an inverse of what these analog companies are doing?
Not so much. I mean, and I think to clarify, we had a lot of excess capacity when things were good. So I think we have kind of had to, we haven't expanded. I mean, we have tried to stay very, very lean, because even us, we don't know where this is going. And in order to make this really work, we have to scale big. And so we just decided we were going to just kind of hunker down and just, work with what we've got, and just see where things go. And try to forge a few new partnerships with financial institutions and distribution channels that are related to financial institutions. And so we're working those and trying, before we expand. We have delayed our Series A and all those sorts of things, so that we don't get over our skis, so to say. And but we have. So I guess in that regard, we have kind of gone back to basics, in the sense that, we're really not, in this high flying, world that was prior to the slowdown after COVID. And I think that if COVID hadn't happened, it may have been, better for a lot of companies, including us, to gain venture capital. But as far as companies like us, it's been better on uptake for at least a portion of our business. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we have been back to basics, in the sense that we're very frugal and lean.
It seems that a lot of organizations, especially tech-oriented organizations, are kind of going back to basics. They had plans to do all these really big projects that the whole team was excited about. But then when things hit, it's kind of like, okay, we need to focus on what we know, what we're good at. And like you said, you don't want to get too far out over your skis by reaching for more investment. It's like, what can we do with what we've got? Because no one knows what 2021 or 2022 is going to hold for us. So how has that shifted your team dynamic on just like your direct reports and all of that? And you'd mentioned the changes to just meetings and things like that. Have you had any structural changes or procedural changes that you felt like are going to be critical for 2021 and beyond?
Probably the biggest one. I mean, I think the engineering teams are already really good at using technology and, trying to do agile over, technology versus in person has not been too difficult. I mean, we were already in distributed online, repositories. We're already in cloud. We're already, many of those things, we can access from anywhere. I think though, on the upper management, that's really, I think the biggest change is up, not down in engineering organizations. I think they're kind of leading the way in how to go about this, but strategy and the meetings that you have for budgeting and for running the company and those sorts of things, I think that's really, where it's going to have to even get better, because it seems that in the C level and that the director level and the strategy level of businesses, they're not so good at online meetings. Even our sales people, who had heretofore been flying around talking to businesses and going to lunch and all those kind of things. I think that's really the bigger end of this, and I think we've seen more struggles in that area, trying to come to the meeting of the minds, on strategy and in sales operations and that sort of thing, more than in development.
So have you had to sell your C-suite on certain objectives that you're trying to do moving into 2021, or is it more of just, like you said, the sort of the hunker down and let's just plug through until we can see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I think we've kind of been the latter on that, and that waiting to try to figure out what's going to be happening. But here in 2022, I think now the strategy ideas are starting to bubble up, because we had been hunkered down just trying to focus on those sorts of things. And now we're kind of moving to this, okay, now what is 2021, 2022? Because our plans have been blown out of the water. We had one plan and then we went into the hunker down mode, and now it's like we're emerging from that. Like, well, we can't just stay in the hunker down mode forever. I mean, I literally thought that back in March, I thought we'd be back in the office in April, and that was literally my thought. And now I'm like, maybe not till next April or even later, who knows? And so, and I think the bigger changes are maybe we're never going to go back to a brick and mortar office, and maybe we're going to be, distributed all over the country. And, we're going to start looking for talent that doesn't necessarily have to be sitting nearby and those sorts of things. So those are the strategies that we haven't figured out yet. And what are we going to do?
What are some of the mindsets that you take into helping make these decisions? What are some of these core principles that you believe in, or that your company does, to say, yes, this is something we should go for, or this is, too far out over the skis? How are you analyzing that?
I wish I had a good answer to that. Like I say, we're just in the beginning stages of that. And so even on some direction of our company and, some things we had been planning on doing, are we going to continue to do those? Are we going to split that off into some other entity? Or, we're kind of even going through that. But I think the main thing that I think we've kind of come to the conclusion of is that we likely are going to be much more of a remote organization, and not plan for lots of space, and so I think that's really probably that's not a definitive, but I mean it's one of the things that we've learned that remote isn't a bad way to go. We tend to be fairly similar in our capabilities and our productivity, I guess would be a way to talk about it. So I think that many people have found that as well. I think some startups, they are a little bit more in the, their culture is their building and their space, and that's where many of their perks. I've heard of several in the area and in California that had these super amazing offices, and most of their draw to employees, why they wanted to be there, was because of the perks that were at the office. And I think that that's going to be one big change, is that, yeah, we've, these companies who have invested in facilities to do that draw, what's going to happen if you're remote? And I think that we kind of got lucky because we hadn't got to that stage where we had invested a lot in facilities for our culture and our perks. And I think that's going to be one of the things that people are going to have to figure out. I don't think anybody's done a really super great job. I have heard of a few companies that are doing some things that I like, but it's going to be something that every one of us is going to have to figure out. How do we draw the great people that, that enjoyed those perks? How are we going to, change those to be available to people who work remotely, and how are they changing? It's one of the big areas I think I'm trying to figure out myself.
You brought up that the productivity or your progress on projects and, keeping the lights on hasn't really shifted since you moved to distributed work. How do you monitor that, and just how are you factoring in your workflows and just your progress on projects?
It's frequent check-in. I mean, it's obviously the same things that would be in the case of in-person work, right? You're still looking at the demonstrations of progress. You look at your process. You usually have something like either Scrum or some ceremonies that you do at periodic times. So you continue to do those. You do those distributed, do those over technology, but not to feel like I'm pandering, but we have used the product that you guys purchased that you now name Flow. I think is the Flow thing, and I think that's it. It is one of those things that maybe come across as Big Brother. Let me explain. For those people who don't know what Flow is, it was Git Prime, Git Prime, and so I think that one of the things that is nice about Git Prime, I think you can use it. In fact, as we started using it, people used to think it was a little bit Big Brother. It's like, my check-ins or this check-in or whatever. But what I started noticing is it started driving some behaviors. I had one engineer who would do these massive check-ins all the time, and even though we'd talk about, hey, let's not do these big check-ins, but nobody really knew that it was a problem, because you don't know it's a problem until you start looking. It's like, well, maybe big check-ins are fine. And now I just look at my engineering organization, I can see, all of the other people, or a preponderance of them, have, smaller check-ins, and then you can start looking at bugs, and you can start looking at other types of metrics that kind of help you understand, hey, big check-ins tend to lead to more bugs, or whatever the correlation might be. And I had somebody, who didn't check in frequently, right? Somebody who would check in once a month, or once every couple of weeks, and he had a little bit different kind of work that he was working on, but he started seeing that, wow, look, this other person had all these nice, check-ins, and he was looked at as one of the better engineers that did more check-ins, and it kind of like helped people, instead of people figuring that was Big Brother, they started looking at outcomes. And I think so. One of the tools that I think is nice is tools like the tools that Pluralsight now provides, in the sense of Flow. I also think that there are other metrics that you need to look at, as far as like quality and story points over the goal line and that sort of thing. Since we do Kanban, you don't really have you're not trying to hit a certain goal, but you're just trying to keep steady progress going. I think that those are nice to look at when you these metrics that you've always had available to you as well.
I've never met an engineer that just wants to sit around and do nothing. They want to do good work and they want to make cool stuff and quality product. And so if they can see what they're doing and see where they can improve, I think it benefits everyone.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing with like code reviews. I remember when they first came around, everybody was like, oh no, now they're gonna find out I'm a charlatan. I don't know everything that I act like I know, and they're gonna see this. And what it ended up doing was ended up raising all boats, right? I mean, even I've had interns that come in and do some things and teach my senior engineers like, oh, that's a really nifty new idea. Or senior engineers can be like, hey, let me help you with this. This is a problem, go do this. And it just, everybody rises. And I think that flow is a very similar type of thing. It's more the nuanced stuff that you don't see in a code review. It's, that's long-term effects. It's, what the best engineers are doing. How do you mimic them? Well, here's some additional nuanced ways to do so.
How have retrospectives and these daily stand-ups, have they shifted at all in content or context?
I think there are some things, right? So we had a remote team before, as I mentioned, and I think that we gained I don't know if you want to call it a superpower, of teams, to do remote ceremonies and remote agile, processes. However, I think that the one thing that has changed is that there was a group of people who were always remote, and there was a group of people who were always in the office. And I think that this has given us the ability to see, maybe some of the shortcomings that we were dealing with, that their remote people were already dealing with, and just learn to live with. And I think it's given us new ideas to how do we make it better for the remote people, and not just live with the inefficiencies that they had to live with. And so I think most of that is just making sure that we have, I don't know, I don't truly believe in completely this, but as we were trying to build our culture with remote, I did a look, because I didn't really, a lot of stand-ups that you go to are like, they're really super boring. It's like, they call your name, you say, I'm working on, 755 and no blockers, no whatever, and it's just super boring even in person, but it's meant to, it's tried to be an efficient meeting. And so I looked at that and I'm like, I don't even know what number 755 is. I have to go look at it. It's kind of a terrible meeting. I don't really come out of this with anything. And I ran across an article, I wish I had the reference to it now, but it was called Cafes. And essentially what the cafe process is, it's like a stand-up. It can be, very efficient meeting still, but it always starts out or ends with a socialization section. So where we kind of like, hey, what's going on? Do the water cooler talk, chat about the game, do some smack talk against your team, your school, whatever, and talk about some your show pictures of your new car, or your new board and batten that you put on your wall in your house or whatever. And so we started doing a lot more of that, where we have maybe 20% of the meeting even is that. And I think that's really, we learned to do that early on with our remote team, and I think that's what built the camaraderie and that sort of thing. It's it's a little bit of wasted time, but technically it's not wasted. It's actually time that you become friends and you kind of learn about each other, and it's not just all business. And so I think that's one of the superpowers that we got through having our original, one, my dissatisfaction with issue number 754 and no blockers, no whatever, and finding it to be, now we actually talk about, we don't even allow people to talk about the number of the issue. We basically just talk about, we show and tell a little bit more. We talk about things in a little bit better way, and and then we open it up every day for hey, we almost do a daily retrospective. Hey, what's working, what's not? Hey, let's fix this, let's change this, rather than wait for the the big retrospectives. And I think that's some of the things that we've kind of put into our daily routine. And we actually involve our management, even this, our non-engineering people, we kind of do similar types of things. We have weekly meetings that are like that, where we have the whole company on and we talk about it. And
do you have any specific anecdotes where your team or leadership has noticed a difference in how your team is operating through these type of tactics or anything like that?
Let me think about that one. As far as anecdotes, I mean, I think obviously the team is a lot closer. I mean, that one, the anecdote I already shared with how we did the party and they wanted to include, make sure the others were included there. I don't think that normally would have happened with an outsourced team. But I think, as far as like other types of things, I think the show and tell, actually, our CEO really gets excited about those, because obviously he's working on certain things that aren't, always materialize quickly. And I think that, just being able to show a bottoms up show of that, then he actually is able, and even our COO is a little more involved in day to day, but our CEO is not as much. And so I think he gets, it kind of builds excitement, because the business folks, they have long tail projects that they're working on. They're trying to drag customers across the line and work on contracts and all kinds of things that aren't necessarily as much fun. And whereas engineering is like building the excitement, they're the future of the company and what we're going to be selling tomorrow. And so that's probably the biggest benefit that I can see to these things. Now, as far as the retrospectives go, it varies from processes on reimbursements improving. So morale gets improved quickly. We've had that where nobody liked the way that reimbursements were happening, and in those quick retrospectives, something happened, and now we fixed that problem really quickly. And where I think, had we not had that, when and how would that have, how long would that have taken to get to, a better situation? And as far as deep development things, I mean, we change architecture based on these, a much quicker. I think it leads to a much quicker cycle time. I think that's really, when you look at almost any business process, cycle time is something that, if we were to drive down cycle time on almost anything, then you get improvements. And I think that that's probably the bigger benefit, is our reduced cycle time on issues that we could have had to wait for a sprint or two or a project to end before we actually fixed it and changed it.
I mean, it's kind of the simple and very effective approach of just check in early and often. And I like that aspect a lot. What are you telling your team going into 2021? What is the overall message?
Well, our feeling is it's going to be big. So we're trying to build excitement, and we think that we have figured out product market fit. Obviously the time will tell. And I guess the other thing is, we do have a lot of deals that are starting to materialize that just take a long time, and so I think that's one of the big things that we're talking about, how the world is changing for this mechanization of lending and money. And I think more of a democratization. It's like money's not hidden in back rooms with maybe the old smoking rooms that they used to have in the olden days, the speakeasies or whatever, where you'd have to go and know the guy to talk to the guy to get you the money. And I think that that's really, what we're excited about next year is that hopefully that we're going to be bringing all these interesting ways to get funding and that sort of thing brought out into the light, and more mechanized and more automated, so that it's more accessible to a lot more people than had been in the past.
Do you feel that what APiO is doing will help with just transparency in lending and all that type of stuff over time?
What these processes tend to do is tend to bring out, hey, this gets more of a democratization of that, where it's more out in the open. You're dealing not so much on the character and that I like this person as much as you are like the facts. And I think that's always good for every industry. And I think that's, there are many industries that have already gone through that, and even hiring and, other practices that have been brought to light, and equal pay and all those kind of things. I think they're all part and parcel to this same thing. The more data that people have, and they're like, hey, that person's getting paid. I'm doing the same job, but that person's getting paid more. And the same thing, it's like, I don't have to just know a guy that knows a guy to get the funding. Now I can connect my accounting system, and I can, on my own merits, I can, get funding. And it's not as much, on who I like and who I know, or, who I'm like and who I'm not like. It's more, based on merit and on more of a democratized way. So I do believe that that's what this is going to accomplish. Is it's going to level the playing fields. It's going to, undo the redlining and gender and ethnicity barriers that maybe had heretofore been. I know banks are trying to do that. I shouldn't demonize them, but I mean, the numbers don't lie, that women and minority-owned businesses have a lot less access to capital. And we're aiming to take that head on.
What are you keeping your eye on in terms of trends, or, what are you keeping your eye on in terms of danger signs?
Yeah, that one's a tough one. I have friends, I have here, before this, I had worked at large banks and have armies of, economists and that sort of thing. And some of the signs that are coming out of those institutions aren't great. Some of them are saying that, it's going to be an 8-year recovery, and, it's like only 20% of the businesses have failed thus far. And, so we've got another 80% of the failings that are going to happen still to come. I hope those don't come to fruition, and, maybe, policy and change of, our federal and local governments may, change that outcome. But, so I'm looking at those kind of things, but I'm also encouraged a little bit in the sense that, if the big banks are trying to shed, cost, and they're expecting to hunker down for a long winter of financial doom and gloom, that maybe, the smaller businesses who have not really had great access to capital at those institutions anyway, that maybe we can break open that section with, that. So that's kind of the things I hope I don't see what I'm hearing about from those, but there are also indicators that the smaller businesses might do better in some of these situations if they have access to the resources and the stuff that they need in order to begin and continue their business right now, and as they adapt. I think that's the bigger thing. Is I think businesses are adapting, and I think we're going to be surprised at the human ingenuity of people. I mean, we've seen it in restaurants, we've seen it in grocery, we've seen it in a lot of the essential businesses, and now some of the unessential, quote unquote, businesses will have, they're starting to learn and adapt as well. And so it might just change a lot of things for the better, for I'm guessing.
What do you say to your colleagues that are in this same level that maybe doesn't apply to your industry specifically, but just as an engineering leader, what would you be advising to a peer of yours?
Yeah, I think the bigger things to think about are the same things that have probably existed since the beginning of business and commerce, is that you need to take care of your people. That's your number one, thing you got to do. Not only, the perks and all that kind of stuff's nice, and they're necessary in good times, but in the bad times, you got to really make sure that you're watching out for their well-being. It's your main, it's why you're in business. It's not only to sell stuff. It's the people, the family that you have inside the company. I think that's one thing that I like to think that would be something that we would have hopefully a good discussion on how to go about that. The other one, is like anything, it's we need to make sure that we're building craftspeople of people who care about not only the back of the fence but the front of the fence, not only the front of the fence but the back of the fence that maybe you won't necessarily see, the things that are hidden that you can not do as well, and but you need to do good work and teach others how to do that. And I think the other thing is just help people get to where they were trying to go. Everyone's trying to get somewhere. Today is a great place, and a lot of people are happy with where they're at the moment. But I think most people are trying to get somewhere else, and not necessarily to another company, but to build their skills or work in a different department or work on a different project and at a different level. And I think that's the main thing that we as leaders need to always be cognizant of, is how do we help them get to where they are trying to go, at the same time getting the benefit of what you need in your own company and their own position today. But building people is more important than building companies. And I think if you build people, companies build themselves.
Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. To see show notes and more info, visit pluralsight.com/podcast. Have a great week.